I want to confess, I'm a playlist junkie. I love hard rock and metal music, and I want to tell you about some awesome playlists I've made. You're not going to hear any music here. I'm just going to list the titles, so if you own the same songs, you can recreate the playlists if you want using iTunes or whatever. The first one is a playlist called Metallica versus Megadeth. I'll explain how that works, but first, a little history. A lot of this might be obvious, but we know musicians typically release their work as albums, and while I appreciate listening to a pre-chosen collection of songs in the order that the artist arranged for us, or sometimes it's the producer's selection or the record company or whatever, sometimes you want to change things up. Sure, you can get compilation albums that include songs from various artists or greatest hits from an individual artist, but sometimes you're feeling something special. You want to take control of your listening experience and select your own songs. It's like being your own radio station. Nowadays, that's extremely easy to do, but before the digital age, it was not. Yep, this is one of those back in my day stories. We had mixtapes. This is when you'd queue up the original tape or CD and record the songs you want onto a blank audio cassette. Or your brother or sister's audio cassette because you're an asshole or whatever. This meant you had to sit there and listen to everything in real time. But once it's all done, you'd have a playlist that's continuous, except whenever you'd have to flip the cassette over to side B. Oh, and that was the worst when you'd be recording a song and the tape would end. So then, do you keep half the song or do you just start fresh on the other side? This whole process was similar to editing my own movies on 2 VCRs. You put something in order and then you sit back and watch or listen to all the work you just did. Eventually, they made recordable CDs for consumers, and when computers got good enough, it became possible to mix your own custom CDs. But even then, not everybody had CD players in their cars, and when they did, it was still a pain carrying all that physical media around. When you're swapping CDs and leaving them lying around in your car, they'd get scratched and they wouldn't work anymore, so you had to keep them organized. I had one of those binders that was heavier than a phone book. Wow, phone books, that's another thing that's long gone. Then came the iPod, so you can bring all your music on something that's smaller than your hand and access any of the songs without swapping discs. But still, there was always the question of how to get the music to play from the iPod to the car. I had a car with a CD player, but no auxiliary input. So for the iPod, I had to use this shitty radio transmitter. You plug it into the iPod, and it sends out a signal that you're supposed to tune into your radio with. It never worked well, and no matter which frequency you tried, there was always static and it sounded like crackling ass. So I ended up buying an older car with a cassette deck just so I could use a cassette adapter to play my damn iPod. And now, cars all have auxiliary input, USB, and even Bluetooth, which is amazing. Now I just play the music wirelessly from my phone. So we're good now to satisfy all our playlist cravings. As much as iTunes pisses me off with all those constant updates and changing the whole interface every other week, I still can't live without it. So let me share with you some of my playlists. All you gotta do is get the songs in your digital library, recreate the list, and you can listen along with me. So here's Metallica versus Megadeth. This is a fun playlist that allows you to enjoy two of the greatest metal bands in one pulverizing session. If you're a fan of both, I'm sure you know the connection, but just in case, the short version of the story is that Dave Mustaine played guitar in Metallica and was a big part of the early incarnation of the band. He was kicked out and formed his own band, Megadeth. Very famously, there were some hard feelings, and through Megadeth's music, you hear a lot of genuine anger, which gives the sense that this is a retaliation. They're trying to show Metallica up, and doing a good job at it. Lately, the two bands have been friendly. They've shared the stage together many times, and it seems like all that's in the past. Whatever rivalry actually existed only served to make each band better, to make them play at the top of their games. They're both awesome. I'm not here to pick a winner. That's not what this is about. Not to fuel a rivalry. It's just for fun. It's to create a virtual battle of the bands in your own home or car or wherever. This is going to place you right in the middle of the atomic crossfire of two of the greatest fucking bands of all time. We're going to go through each band's history in roughly chronological order with 13 rounds matching up killer tracks from each time period. Let's go. Round 1. The Four Horsemen by Metallica, Mechanics by Megadeth. we're in 83, 85. Metallica obviously gets the head start as their debut album Kill 'Em All dropped first, but Dave contributed a lot to it. Mechanics was actually the original song that became Four Horsemen, so when Megadeth released it on their own album, it sounds like an urgent response to play it harder and faster. When you listen to these two songs back to back, it gives you a continuous rush. Round 2, 84, 85. Metallica comes out all guns blazing with Fight Fire with Fire, and Megadeth answers with Last Rites. Both of these songs start out with a mellow intro, Metallica with an acoustic guitar, Megadeth with a classical piano, and then they clobber you, shifting all the way to full power. Round 3, both in 86, Metallica brings in Master of Puppets, and Megadeth fires back with Peace Sells. Two of their most iconic tracks both seem to deal with political power struggles and corruption, and both became fixtures to their concert set lists for decades. Round 4, we're in 88, To Live Is To Die by Metallica, In My Darkest Hour by Megadeth. Bringing the tempo down a bit here, a bit slower but equally dark and heavy. Both bands here are reacting to the tragic death of Metallica bassist Cliff Burton, who would leave a lasting impression on them personally and to the world of metal music. Round 5, we're in 1988 and 1990. Metallica accelerates things with Dyer's Eve, and Megadeth retaliates with the devastating Holy Wars. Two brutal tracks that showcase both bands at their heaviest. Round 6, we're in 91. Enter Sandman by Metallica, Go to Hell by Megadeth. Both songs came out the same year and just so happened to use the same prayer. Now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep, that whole thing. From what I gather, it was just a coincidence, but for this playlist, it works out perfectly. Round 7, we're in 91-92. The Unforgiven by Metallica and Countdown to Extinction by Megadeth. This is probably the most mainstream metal matchup of the whole list. Both these albums were highly commercially successful. They're best-selling albums at the time, and I believe still to this very day. Round 8, we're in 94-96. Hero of the Day by Metallica, A Tout Le Monde by Megadeth. Both these bands continued to explore more commercial sounds, but also experimenting and evolving as artists. Round 9, we're in 97. The Memory Remains by Metallica and Trust by Megadeth. Again, still progressing into new musical territory. I really loved Metallica's load-reload combo and Megadeth's cryptic writings. And then we go into an interesting period in their history. Round 10, we're in 2001-2003. Some Kind of Monster by Metallica and Disconnect by Megadeth. In the early 2000s, there was a lot of turmoil in both bands. Both of them practically broke up for a brief time, and each band had to rebuild themselves. And even if you overlook that, their musical output at this time seemed to receive the most criticism of both their entire careers. But these two tracks, I think, are pretty good. I know especially with Metallica's Saint Anger, everybody criticizes that album for the drum sound and the lack of Kirk solos, but the riffs are awesome. It's not my favorite album, but it far from sucks. Round 11, we're in 2008-2009, All Nightmare Long by Metallica and Head Crusher by Megadeth. These two were considered a return to classic form for both bands, and these two tracks demonstrate that very well. Isn't it fascinating how both of their careers sync up so much? Now we're in round 12, 2011, Hate Train by Metallica, Public Enemy No. 1 by Megadeth. Megadeth was really gaining speed. With Metallica, the song was just an outtake from their previous album, but still, it's a worthy matchup. And round 13, 2016, Hardwired by Metallica. Speaking of which, I want to talk more about that Hardwired album in another video coming up. And then Dystopia by Megadeth. Once again, both bands show that they still got it. It's an immortal battle that seems like it'll go on forever. So this video got kind of long, mostly because of the intro. The rest should be shorter. But anyway, you can obviously modify the list and play around with it if you like, if you're a playlist junkie like me.